Okay, right. So, thank you everyone for coming. I know we probably are expecting a few more to come in a few minutes. And thank you everyone for coming. I know that there's loads of end of kind of semester exams, etc. So, thank you for coming. So I'll just run through a few announcements right now, whilst I can. So we have our internal conveners meeting coming up on the 16th of December at 6 p.m. So that will be with Emily Monroe, our internal convener. So that event will be posted on our Facebook page. So keep up to date with that. Emily wanted me to also inform you all that the motion for next week's debate is going to be changed. So the motion, as is at the moment, is this House believes the is it this House believes or this House regrets? This House believes the Irish language has been politicised, so that's now being changed to this House. Emily, is it being changed to this House would pass the Irish Language Act, or
yeah, this House would support the Irish Language Act.
This House would support the Irish Language Act. So that is being changed. That event will be put up after tonight's debate, so you can register to speak at that debate. Also, our Julian Smith Lit Talk is this Friday at 6 p.m. So thanks to Ryan Hoey, our events officer, for organising that. So as the former Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, who will be speaking to society on Friday at 6. So that's a really good event that we're really happy and really proud to announce. So please do get involved with that if you can. Also, our Christmas motions are to be announced for the debate on the 17th. So the motions for our Christmas mini debates are: this House would unionise Santa's elves, this House would charge Santa with breaking and entering, and this House would, as a turkey, vote for Christmas. So if you're interested in doing our mini debates, there is a speaker for both the proposition and opposition on each of those debates. So please do contact Emily Monroe or the page to register to speak at those mini debates. And also congratulations to Kira Swell and Mark Gilmore on the Irish Times. Kira and Mark, through being a wild card in Mark's case, have got through to the next stage. So congratulations to both of you. And we give you our best wishes and hope that you do even better and carry on doing well. So thank you to both of you. So now I think we'll just get on with the proceedings for tonight's debate. So now it turns to you. If you have any pieces of private members, no, what? Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. No, I haven't done the minutes yet. I've just remembered. Thanks. So now it turns to me to introduce Matthew Sullivan to introduce the minutes for last week's debate. Thank you, Matthew.
Imagine forgetting about the minutes, everyone's favourite part of these meetings. Truly shameful. On the 26th of November 2020, the Queen's University Belfast Literary and Scientific Society convened for the 10th ordinary meeting of its 172nd session for the motion this House would support mandatory vaccinations. Of course, this was also a special meeting because this was our annual Godkin Maiden Speakers competition, judged by Chloe Ferguson, HLM, who was last year's secretary, Treasurer Tara Chisholm, and internal convener Emily Monroe. As usual, the meeting began with announcements from President Matt Lee and then the minutes. This was followed by private members' business, where Pedro Leone told the story of coming across a group of LGBT+ protesters and a group of Christian preachers in Belfast city centre, and asked why these two groups always seemed to be out and about blasting music at each other. Responses were heard from Jack McAfee, Anthony McNutt, Emily Monroe, Ryan Hoey, Mark Gilmore, Sam McBride, Ciara Swale, Shannon Myers, Ben Cavan, and Tara Chisholm. Tara Chisholm asked the House what they thought of the country opening up for the week right before the next 2-week lockdown comes. Responses were heard on that from Emily Monroe, Shannon Myers, Ryan Oey, Ciara Swale, and James Orchin. After President's questions, the vote of prior opinion was held, with 11 votes for the proposition, 6 votes for the opposition, and 5 abstentions. Speaking first for the proposition, in his maiden speech, was Jonathan McClintock. He told the House that while individual liberty is important, it is not as important as the civic duty to protect those in society who cannot be vaccinated. He stated that there should not be any religious or philosophical exemptions to vaccination, arguing that the infringement upon people's religious freedoms was minor compared to the infringement on people's right to be protected from these diseases. Speaking first for the opposition was Ryan Hoey. In what was definitely not his maiden speech, he began by saying that the opposition weren't conspiracy theorists or anti-vaxxers, and he told the story of a family gathering in which his mother had convinced him that mandatory vaccinations were not the way to go, arguing that a 94% vaccination rate in the UK had already been achieved and had already achieved herd immunity for most vaccinatable diseases. He further argued that there would be no penalty that the government could impose which would convince an anti-vaxxer to actually take a vaccine, and advocated for a policy where the government would pay people to become vaccinated to incentivize those who were on the fence. Speaking second for the proposition was Cliona O'Donovan. She argued for the protection of immunocompromised people and those who can't take vaccines for any other reasons. She pointed out that almost all vaccines have a large list of restrictions on people who can't take them, often excluding those who need protection the most. She further argued that concerns about the health risks of vaccines were completely unfounded, citing the extensive approval process that vaccines have to go through. Speaking second for the opposition was Shannon Paler. She stated that while she was very much for vaccines, she was against the idea of making them mandatory because that would damage public perception of them and reduce the number of people who want to become vaccinated. She argued further that mandatory vaccination would be futile because the evidence of existence of immunocompromised people and others who can't receive vaccines prevents us from vaccinating everybody, and because the 94% of people who already do receive vaccines is more than enough to create a safe environment. Speaking third for the proposition was Jack McAfee. He told the House that this was not a matter of personal freedom, because nobody has the right to expose others to harm, and by choosing not to become vaccinated, a person does expose others to potential harm. He argued that by allowing anti-vaxxers to push their ideology, we would risk the population dropping below the safe threshold of vaccination, saying that we can't rely on people to have goodwill and to avoid misinformation. Speaking third for the opposition and concluding the debate was Ayanna O'Hara. He talked about the rise of disinformation, saying that there was a rising distrust in authority in society. He argued that introducing mandatory vaccinations would only exacerbate this distrust, and that the best way to increase vaccination rates would be to educate people and to rebuild this trust. He additionally pointed out that mandatory vaccination would violate the Nuremberg Code, which forbids performing medical procedures on people without their consent. Questions were heard from Mark Gilmore, Ciara Swale, and Jay Radcliffe, and after a lengthy deliberation, the judges returned and announced that the winner of the 2020 Godkin Maiden Speakers competition was none other than Ayanna O'Hara. May I take the minutes as read? I'll take that as a yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew, and sorry that I nearly skipped you there. I apologise. Congratulations once again to Ayanna on his fabulous speech and his victory. And we will get his prize to him as soon as possible. So now it does actually turn to you to raise any points of information that you feel that you've acknowledged over the last few weeks in private members' business, where you can put these motions and points to the rest of the House. And I see Matthew Sullivan has raised his hand straight away, and I will go to him because I did try and skip him before.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So, as it is now December, we finally entered the period of time in which it is acceptable to sing and listen to Christmas carols. And so I would like to ask the House what they believe the best Christmas carol is and why it is Good King Wenceslas.
Would anyone like to respond to that point? Ben Cavan.
Yes, I love this generalisation. I mean, if we're going to generalise everyone's favourite Christmas carol, it has to be O Holy Night, the Home Alone version. Like whenever Kevin McAllister goes into the church and, you know, old man Marley comes up to him and O Holy Night's playing in the background, it's beautiful. And King's College Cambridge do a beautiful rendition. They do beautiful renditions of loads of hymns. But yeah, in essence, O Holy Night is a tune. So yeah.
Thank you, Ben. Ciara Swale.
Now we bring into the question of what actually counts as a carol, and I'm going to take it very far, because why not? Because one of my favourite Christmas carols is a remix, between between All I Want for Christmas Is You and the Black Parade. And I think it represents the best thing about Christmas, which is two things that really should not go together whatsoever. Bringing us all together in a strangely beautiful harmony that shouldn't work, but it does.
Thank you. And on that note, as people will be aware, I am not allowed to be political, but I thought I would share something with the House, which is actually Ryan Hoey's favourite Christmas song, which is also a crossover of All I Want for Christmas Is You with another song. So let's just hear it for a second.
It's you.
Yes, Ryan Hoey's favourite song is All I Want for Christmas Is You, crossed with WAP. So that does exist. I just thought I'd inform you of that. Emily Monroe.
Okay, before I say what I was actually going to say, I need to inform Ryan that he is a man of excellent taste. But anyway, if we're going to argue for what the best Christmas carol is, I think it has to be Away in a Manger, not only because it undeniably slaps, but also because it is versatile. There are two different versions of Away in a Manger, set to two different tunes. There's an Away in a Manger for every mood, you know? So in terms of sheer, like, emotional mileage, I think it has to win.
We can't hear you, son.
Any further nominations of Christmas carols that people appreciate? Yes, James Orchard.
I don't really want to nominate anything. I just think the fact that pop culture and ecclesiastical music is being merged together is just an example of the degeneracy of our times. It sickens me that we can put together music that is brilliant, like carol music, and put it with WAP. Why? Why?
That's the question we're all still asking ourselves, James. Kira Swell.
Well, art is subjective, and
No, it's
to
not.
the average club goer, WAP is just the epitome of nightclub culture, and I would argue that it is a great representation about feet. I'm not even gonna go there. Like, it's a thing. But to be fair, like, people have used it to do women's empowerment, so but yeah.
Yes, thank you. Any further comments on Christmas carols and degeneracy, I suppose? No? Okay. Any further private members' business? Be surprised. Yes, Grant Warren.
So yes, earlier this week, the British High Court ruled on whether under 16s should have the capacity to make informed decisions regarding taking puberty blockers. And the decision has been, and they ruled that it is highly unlikely. And this has been throughout the liberal media. The few liberal and left-wing papers there are in Britain have kind of decried it as a rolling back of trans rights, and I'm not asking people to pass comment on kind of wider issues of trans identity or the wider question of trans rights, but what does the House think about 16-year-olds being or not being in a position to make informed decisions about whether to take puberty blockers?
Okay, Keir Crozier.
Yes, I think that the court is absolutely spot on. I mean, people under 16, we've decided they're too young, and rightly so, to be able to choose to have sex. So the idea that we allow them to choose to change their sex is ridiculous. It's an irreversible process, and I'm very glad the court's made this decision.
Thank you, Keir. Any further points on this matter? This is the High Court, I think, saying that it's doubtful whether under 16-year-olds can have the abilities to do that. Emily Monroe.
I guess a couple of things on this. First of all, the idea that transitioning is irreversible is just incorrect. People have been known to transition. It's happened. People do it. I understand that perhaps transition is seen as a really big, irreversible, scary thing to do, which it can be, but it's not necessarily irreversible. And also, I feel like this ruling has some wider implications then about under 16s maybe being able to access other forms of medical care. So if you're in a household where you perhaps don't have the backing of your parents and other stuff, what if you needed to like go on the pill or take some other kind of contraception? Then there could be issues accessing that kind of care based on this ruling. So I think not just in the terms of like trans rights and allowing people to have puberty blockers, but also for other stuff, the implications of this I'm not exactly a big fan of.
Thank you, Emily. Any other responses to this? Any further comments that anyone would like to raise? No. Any other pieces of private members' business that people wish to bring up? Other piece of private members' business? Anything at all that anyone may have seen or read or heard? Grant Warren.
Well, seeing as the vaccine is on its way from Pfizer, so I'd just like to echo the comment that Ryan had and made in the meme he uploaded in All Hail Big Pharma, and God bless capitalism and all that crap. But what do people think in terms of how the vaccine should be rolled out? Should we all be back to normal as soon as the most vulnerable in society are inoculated, or do you believe that it should take a far more gradual approach?
Okay, so what are the House's opinions on this? Do we go straight back to normality once the most vulnerable are inoculated, or do we wait and roll this out gradually? Does anyone have any comments? Mr. Ryan Hoey.
Hello. So basically, my opinions on this are that basically, so the government's set out 6 different groups that are going to be vaccinated first. Once we get to the point where it starts off with like over 80s, then it goes down, and then it gets, I think the 6th stage is the most clinically vulnerable group. Once we get to that point, and basically all of those have been vaccinated, then I think we should do away with repeal the Coronavirus Act, go back to having no social distancing and all that sort of stuff, because at that point, basically all the people who are extremely vulnerable to coronavirus would have been vaccinated and would be protected. And but that doesn't mean, for example, if people culturally, it might have been a cultural shift and people want to carry on wearing masks, I would hope that people would have good hand hygiene even after coronavirus. If people want to carry on taking those precautions against other respiratory illnesses that you can get each year, then I'm all in favour of that. But I don't want us to carry on with these restrictions even after we've vaccinated the most vulnerable populations.
Thank you, Ryan. Kira as well.
The problem is with this vaccine as well is that we don't know how long the immune response actually lasts, which is something that's very important if you're going to consider us getting back to normal, because at the end of the day, I think the magic number we need for herd immunity, which I personally think is only going to be achieved through a widespread kind of dishing out of the vaccine. Yeah, exactly. It's about a year. Well, essentially, it's basically like we need to, how do I say this? I think we need to focus on getting a lot of the population actually vaccinated against the virus first in order to actually get a decent level of herd immunity, instead of just going, okay, well, they're like okay for this long until again the virus brings back up again, which is a massive problem, especially considering that I don't know if this is true or not, but I've read some reports that they're have been word that young people are just not going to get the vaccine, which personally I just think is a bit problematic.
Yes. Any further comments on this? Thank you, thank you, Ryan.
Just to come back on what Kira just said there, I think the problem is that if we take this ultra careful approach, even after we've vaccinated the most vulnerable, I don't know if people saw earlier this week we had the spending review and the Office for Budget Responsibility published the 3 different scenarios, and the different scenarios were we return to normal by the end of spring, we return to normal by midway through next year, or we return to normal at the end of 2021. The difference between those 3 scenarios is basically, we had this discussion in the lockdown debate a few weeks ago. If we return to normal by spring, then the economy might be able to recover completely, and we might be able to basically be back to where we were before, except with a lot more debt, obviously. If we leave returning back to normal to the middle of next year, then we will have serious problems in terms of the economy will be depressed until maybe 2022, 2024. If we don't go back to normal until the end of next year, then the economy won't reach its pre-crisis level and even until 2025. So we will be living with the consequences of it for a long time if we take this uber careful approach.
Thank you, Ryan. Jasmine Thompson.
Hi. I just kind of wanted to add, I think this idea that young people are completely immune to any of the effects of COVID is way too general, and I feel like that's kind of what's being spouted in the news. So I'm up at accommodation as an RA, and all the RAs got it at the same time, and some of them, one guy was 22, he's very fit, goes to the gym, and he was completely out with it. He was struggling, he could hardly breathe, he couldn't turn up for shifts afterwards. We don't absolutely know the effects long term. They haven't really been studied yet to an appropriate level. So I think the idea from the government that young people are completely invulnerable to it is probably not completely correct from my own view.
Thank you, Jasmine, for that. So now we turn to President's questions. We only have time for 1 or 2, but if anyone does have a question to the President, they can ask it now. Yes, Mr. Orchin.
President, something I've been wondering for a while is that I really want to know is, what are you asking Santa for Christmas this year?
What am I asking Santa for Christmas this year? I actually have asked Santa for a book, a book this year. I've asked him for An American Life by Ronald Reagan, Ronald Reagan's autobiography. So yeah, that's what I've asked Santa for this year. Any other questions? No. Okay. Oh, Mr. Hoey.
So this week with the vaccine news, Matt Hancock said that he would take the vaccine on live TV with Piers Morgan to encourage people to get it. If it becomes available to our age group, will you take the vaccine live at a Litterific debate to encourage our members to take the vaccine?
I really don't think that's necessary, and I also don't think I could convince the NHS to allow me to kind of live broadcast it from home, or what the situation would be. So I don't think that is possible. But if it was possible, then of course I would take it on a Litterific debate. Okay, thank you, Ryan. So now we actually turn to the business of tonight's debate. So the motion of tonight's debate is that this House would ban segregation in education. So now it turns to the vote of prior opinion. So this is your opinion right now before hearing any of the speeches in tonight's debate. So all those who right now coming into the debate are in favor of the motion, this House would ban segregation in education, please raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Oh, thank you, Shane. Mr. Secretary, have you got a number for that?
I kept being like about to say it, and then another hand would pop up, but I think it's pretty stable at 10 votes now.
Yes. Good. Could you all lower your hands, please? All those who coming into tonight's debate are against the motion, so they are against the banning of segregation in education, please raise your hand and say nay. Great. Mr. Secretary, do we have a number for that?
Same thing happened there, but I think it, oh no, it was 8. No, it was 7, then it went up to 8, then it went back down to 7. I think that's 8.
Okay. Could you all lower your hands now, please? And all those who wish to abstain on the motion, so those with no opinion on this or simply do not want to give it away or have friends on either side, please raise your hands now.
That looks like 4.
Okay, brilliant.
Yeah.
Oh, no, did that go up?
It's up to 5 now.
Okay, right. Have you got that then? Great.
Yes.
So, Mr. Secretary, can we have the vote of prior opinion, please?
10 votes for the proposition, 8 votes for the opposition, and 5 abstentions. It looks like the proposition has it.
Brilliant. So thank you everybody for coming tonight for tonight's debate. So now it turns to the actual debate. So I'd like to introduce the first speaker for the proposition, to introduce the proposition's argument in tonight's debate. No one else apart from Shane McGuinness. Thank you.
My camera's on. Yep, everyone can see me. Great.
No.
Education, education, education. Those were the priorities of Tony Blair. Education is the key to prosperity, were the words of Margaret Thatcher. Successive UK governments have made education a key priority of their agenda because they understood that education determines the economy. A better skilled workforce is a more prosperous one. So why do we have an education system that is designed to polarize people? A system that creates an elite that often has little respect for the majority of the population. An elite that thinks it's entitled to earn extraordinarily more than anyone else. An elite which occupies the highest positions in society. The ideology that underlies this elitism is imparted at childhood. I am very happy to open this debate tonight. It is a very important debate that must be discussed, not just by the House, but throughout wider society. For tonight's debate, I will be making a case against economic segregation, bringing the fight against private schools, explaining how they fundamentally entrench inequality. Jasmine will speak second, covering gender segregation in our schools, with Cleona wrapping up our argument, referring to racial segregation in the United States and drawing comparisons to religious segregation in Northern Ireland. The opposition seem to be content with the status quo. They are happy to carry on living in a backwards economy in which there is no level playing field. The opposition are happy living in an unequal society in which the lottery... No, thank you. The opposition are happy living in a society in which the lottery of life decides who gets to go to top schools in the country. The opposition are happy to maintain the unfair advantage private school kids have over the 93% of state school kids. People currently buy their way into private schools for a reason. The UK government's own Social Mobility and Child Poverty Commission has undertaken research that found that 3 years after graduation, male graduates who attended a private school are around 10% more likely to be in the highest positions. The Commission also found that it was a disadvantage to have had state education, to come from an area with low university progression, or to be female or from an ethnic minority?
On that point?
No, thank you. 4 ironically named public schools. Ironic because there is nothing public about them. The 4 being Eton, Westminster, St. Paul's Boys, and St. Paul's Girls. These 4 public schools send more pupils to Oxford and Cambridge than 2,000 other secondary schools combined. The opposition can argue by saying these public schools offer scholarships to hard working class kids, but I would reply that only 1% of students attending these public schools attend without paying any fees at all. The opposition may ask, if I had the money, would I send my child to a private school? And I would reply with, what is the likelihood of me having a spare £30,000 a year to send just one of my kids to private school?
On that point?
No, thank you. The probability is low. If you were not born into a large amount of wealth, if you were not born into money, if you did not win the lottery of life. As Stephen Poloni of the University of Cambridge explained when commenting on the latest international education statistics, he said countries committed to a high-quality comprehensives, such as Finland, yet again come out on top year after year. A stratified and class-segregated school system is not the answer. It is the problem. It is the problem. We should stick with orthodox comprehensives and promote the good local school over this illusion of choice that the opposition would have. We should do
On that point?
No, thank you. We should do everything in our power to upgrade our comprehensive schooling system so there comes a point where private schools become redundant, as they are no longer the favourable option. Only 7% of children are privately educated, but yet your doctor, your lawyer, your journalist, and your prime minister are far more likely to be privately educated than not. Per capita, the UK spends more on private education than any other country in the developed world, with private education fees increasing by 50% over the past decade. If you attend a private school, you are 50 times more likely to progress to Oxford or Cambridge than if you attended a state school. Does this mean that private school students are 50 times smarter than state school students, or 50 times harder working? I don't think anyone in the House believes that, and we all acknowledge that it is fundamentally unfair. If you genuinely want a meritocracy, if you genuinely want to live in a society where there is a level playing field, in which entrenched inequality begins to unravel.
On that point?
Yes, I will take that point.
No, after protected time, sorry.
Apologies. And so if you genuinely want to live in a meritocracy, to live in a society where there is a level playing field, you will vote with us on this motion and ban segregation in education. Thank you.
Thank you, Shane, for a wonderful speech, as always. So now we turn to our second speaker of tonight's debate, the first speaker for the opposition to introduce the opposition's argument in tonight's debate, none less than Jamie Warren.
Thanks, Matt. I just want to open by saying that in Shane's opening speech for the proposition, he has talked primarily about the situation of the education system in England. Me, Ciara, and Keir will primarily be focusing on the educational system in Northern Ireland and how we believe that fundamentally desegregating education in Northern Ireland will lead to a lack of choice for parents as to where to send their child, and how there's been a proven track record of academic results in Northern Ireland in the grammar system, which is very different to the independent school system in England. So segregation within schools is a complex issue, and it can be looked at in multiple ways. So firstly, you have segregation of pupils according to the religious ethos of their school, and secondly, you have the segregation by gender.
Lucky for us here in Northern Ireland, both of these scenarios aren't just common within our education system, but firmly entrenched. We, the opposition, will be putting forward our case for why we believe that segregation within schools, while imperfect, is actually conducive to the development of students into more well-rounded individuals, and that academic achievement and social mobility are turbocharged if pupils have the door open to them to study in a single gender or denominational school. We will no doubt hear from the proposition about how segregated schools are anachronistic. The pupils will have to mix with people from all sorts of backgrounds in real life, and that our society, particularly here in Northern Ireland, is being kept in some kind of sectarian past. In my argument here, I will be outlining the higher academic achievement and social mobility that arises from streamed and segregated education, as well as the importance of having school choice as a freedom of expression. Firstly, I believe it is the case that denominational grammar schools, particularly those of single gender, provide better environments for academic success and personal development. Such schools provide parents the ability to choose which type of school ultimately suits their children's needs. Catholic or state schools exist to educate pupils from different backgrounds in an environment that they are familiar with. And single gender schools generally see smaller class sizes, meaning that students have the time and the space to engage with their teachers to get their head fully around their work. It also means that it is much more likely that pupils will have a better sort of quality of pastoral support from teachers, as the school will have a greater sense of community about it. Compare this to the sprawling academies and state comps in England and Wales that the government forces parents to send their children to purely based on where they live. Good luck getting that kind of academic and pastoral support there. The final facet of how segregated schools can put rocket boosters on students' potential to succeed is that they remove students from old myths and stereotypes about what subject a particular gender is better suited to, actually empowering underrepresented people to go on and assert themselves in a field dominated by the opposite gender, such as encouraging more girls into computer science and more boys into the humanities and psychology. All things taken into account, I can say it is pretty clear that there are greater numbers of resources and support available to kids in segregated education, and this oils the wheels of students' academic prospects. And before someone essentially tries to argue that surely this must only be available to a very privileged few, let's look at the statistics. Around 20% of the kids entitled to free school meals in Northern Ireland attend some kind of segregated selective school. That's more than 30,000 kids. Also, out of the top 10 performing schools in Northern Ireland for the 2018-2019 academic year, every last school had some kind of segregation. My old school was there as well at number 9, Regent House Grammar, which is a state sector grammar school, and it has among the highest percentage of free school meal claimants in an NI grammar school. These stats are a testament to the real and meaningful difference that segregated education can have in students' lives in terms of academic potential and social mobility. And I hope it has shown up the old myth of grammar schools all being pawn shop imitations of Eton and Harrow for what it is, a complete sham. My second and last point is one less to do with waving statistics around and more of a moral question of, do we want to allow parents to be able to make the best decisions for their children in terms of school choice? We in the opposition certainly do. The proposition would rather have every kid dragged kicking and screaming into the supposed utopia of integrated education, where kids are meant to all learn to love each other's cultural background, and all the different political and social questions asked in this country for the last century or so will essentially just evaporate. The simple reality is that by forcing a Protestant kid from the Shankill to play Gaelic or hurley in physical education, or teaching a Catholic kid from the Craigan and Derry about marching band culture and citizenship isn't going to all of a sudden make Protestants love nationalism or Catholics love the Queen. The reality is that segregated schools aren't all that political. It's not teachers or schools who are moulding pupils into unionists and nationalists. It's their home environment. And the cultural insecurities that have permeated through society since the onset of the Troubles start in the home long before people actually have the common sense to know what sectarianism is and the difference in cultural divide between unionism and nationalism. So to present forced assimilation in schools in Northern Ireland as a silver magic bullet to overcome sectarian and political tensions here is quite frankly false and just a bit useless. If parents want an integrated education for their children, that's great. It would certainly expose them to people of different backgrounds and different faiths, but it shouldn't necessarily be a necessity. I would just like to ask that we don't be patronising and support depriving parents of such an essential liberty and making the best decision for their kids. I hope I've illustrated a compelling case for maintaining the existence of segregated schools and that you will vote in line with the proposition tonight. And as the old saying goes, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie, for that speech. Thank you once again. So now it turns to the second speaker for the proposition to continue the case for the proposition, who is actually a maiden speaker in tonight's debate. So thank you again. Jasmine May Thompson to deliver her maiden speech to society and continue the case for the proposition. So thank you, Jasmine.
Thanks very much. So I wanted to begin mine by asking everyone what the purpose of education really was. At the moment, and in normal kind of capitalist society, you could argue that it's to secure an access to jobs or to encourage critical thinking in young people. Whilst both of these are undoubtedly important, I think it's not controversial for me to suggest that the education system should prepare students for adulthood, or put it another way, the real world. My argument will outline why it's so important that both genders are educated together in order to achieve this goal. The world now isn't what it once was, and in my view, for the better. We're surrounded by people from all walks of life, cultures, backgrounds, and genders. And if you've spent any time in student accommodation or at the university itself, you know how diverse the population is. The schools must adapt with the times and provide students with the best possible foundations for entrance into modern society. And I believe that schools at the minute don't provide an environment which is a microcosm of the society that they're going to progress into. Additionally, I will outline that separating the genders reinforces sexist understandings from a young age and impedes young people's ability to develop as individuals. I'd like to acknowledge the historical contribution of women's colleges and finishing schools, which provided sources for education where there were previously none. But despite this, there's no reason why this practice continues into the present day, when women are encouraged to participate in STEM subjects and in other branches of society. I'd like to challenge the assumption made, both by the opposition but also by a number of figures on the other side of the broader debate, that mixed gender education would stifle academic potential. Firstly, there's little evidence in academic literature that sex-segregated schooling results in reduced academic success. There's the assumption.
On that point?
Yeah, go ahead.
There's literally been studies done that have shown that that female sex-segregated schools have encouraged more women to get into STEM subjects. Hence, how is that possible? Surely that's helping them become more equal to men, because they're not going, oh no, I won't do ICT because the whole class is male. And there's literally studies that have shown that teachers favour males over teaching female students.
I'd argue, so on 3 points, I would say, firstly, there's also a number of pieces that suggest the opposite that I've seen. Secondly, I'd argue that if teachers prefer to teach male students, that's something that should be addressed and shouldn't be treated as an intrinsic or natural fact. So I would argue as well that just because girls kind of can get into STEM subjects as children and in schools, that doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to have full liberty when they get into adulthood, because they're still going to be in an environment where they're challenging men, and they might not be prepared for that situation. So I think ultimately providing students with the best understandings of what life is really like will always be the most beneficial way. I would say that there's the assumptions that students will be distracted by another gender and thus be held back academically. and this argument's only relevant to older students. More importantly, however, I believe this is a choice for older students to make when they're old enough. Academic institutions, workplaces, and public environments will not be occupied solely by the gender that young people are attracted to. And again, strong platonic relationships from an early age will increase the chances of respect and cooperation between individuals later in life. I will go on to address the importance of relationships later on. There's also the idea that boys and girls need different forms of education to suit their own needs, but there's also little evidence for this claim. There's always going to be differences between individuals, of course, but these unique concerns are for schools and the students themselves to tackle, as opposed to entirely segregating genders on little evidence at all. Studies into adolescent students find that if the high school environment is successful in reducing the discrepancy between what are often viewed as conflicting roles, adolescent females may place greater emphasis on achievement. And in this regard, refusing to treat boys and girls as different will have the opposite effect than what the opposition may suggest. Schooling plays a critical role in children's psychological development. A multitude of studies in recent years have assessed the role of gender in children's self-categorization. Children show little understandings of difference when young, or will view biological sex differences as curious facts that hold little sway on personality, value, or intelligence. An American study with the nonprofit PLOS-1 showed that single-sex education directly results in increased gender salience, or the awareness of gender as a categorizing dimension. After a 2-week experiment, this resulted in increased conformity to gender stereotypes, reduced interaction with other gender peers, and critically, students viewing these other peers less positively. This introduces the idea of the opposite gender as the other or different, which creates identities in itself and encourages students to reject integration, discussion, and healthy friendships with others. I concede that banning segregation would not eliminate this issue solely, and I do not pretend that putting children together would entirely get rid of sexism. However, I would argue that it's a significant step forward. In regards to relationships, the same study as mentioned before shows that mixed gender interactions of all ages are critical in this regard. They provide opportunities to learn and encourage young people to challenge behavioural norms of the other gender, practice the interpersonal skills critical to communication, and for heterosexual students, learn how to maintain and enjoy romantic relationships. I would also argue that relationship counselling may not be available in single-sex schools for faith reasons, or because it's not seen as necessarily given a reduced command. My conclusion is simply this: students should spend their formative years without an established notion of difference between the genders. The opposition asserts parents' choice, but does not understand the differing needs of students at different ages. I would concede that later in their academic career, students in further education may feel that it's appropriate for them to opt for sex-selective colleges. However, the broader impact of reducing toxic gender roles that limit liberty, full individual utility, and economic prosperity is more important than unsubstantiated claims of academic potential. It's not a silver bullet, as the opposition suggests, but it's a start. Thank you.
Thank you, Jasmine, and congratulations once again on your maiden speech. So now we turn to the second speaker for the opposition, Kira Swell.
So, hello everyone. Before I start my speech, what I'm going to say is I cannot see anything. So please, if you want to raise a POI, just speak aloud. So, what I'm going to do in my speech is I am essentially going to take each point that the proposition is proposed tonight and offer a different way of looking at it. So the first speaker of the proposition has basically made a claim that segregated education is elitist, and essentially, unless you have the money, that you won't get anywhere in life. I would argue that this is not taking into account the whole situation, because let's face it, there are many good universities that aren't Oxford. There are many opportunities for students to get a good education that they don't have to spend 30 grand for. For me, for example, I went to an all-girls Catholic grammar school, so I went to a double whammy, and I am currently in a Russell Group university. I'm also from a working class background. So this notion that segregated education is ultimately elitist isn't necessarily true, especially here. Like, purely based on the fact that you don't have to pay to go to a grammar school here. You just don't. It's based on an academic test. So this notion that essentially you have to somehow have money to get access to a good education, and hence that's why segregation is bad, is completely false. Because yes, private schools exist, but there's also great options out there for people like myself who came from a lower class background. And I went to a segregated all-girls Catholic grammar school, yet I still had access to a good education. I still went to a Russell Group university because essentially I thankfully was fortunate enough to do well in my test. Essentially, I went through based on academic merit, not by the money that was in my parents' pockets. And second of all, I would argue that making, removing private schools won't solve class inequality. If you get a member of the royal family to go to a normal school, they will still be a member of the royal family when they leave there. They will still have much more opportunities than the majority of people. And that's not because of their education. That's because they have more money. That's because of systemic class inequality, which won't be fixed from banning these sorts of schools. And the second thing that I would like to argue from the second member of the proposition is this notion that if we separate the sexes, this is just going to make kind of traditional roles worse. And I would argue the complete opposite. Essentially, I went to an all-girls Catholic grammar school, and in our school, we were taught to go for STEM subjects. We were taught to be inspirational leaders for women. We were not taught to be nuns that just follow the curve. And this notion that, if you don't interact with men, then you ultimately will just be, you won't be able to interact with them, is just blatantly false. Most of the time, when you leave that sort of education, you'll feel weird about a week. Because at the end of the day, you interact with men outside of the classroom as well. You have multiple clubs. You have different schools with men in them that you interact with. Like, for example, now, most of my friends are males. So this concept that if you go to a sex-segregated school, that automatically you're just going to treat men weirdly and not feel right around them, is just not true. Also, the concept of, if you just put them, this notion that sexism shouldn't exist, so we should just put them together. But it does exist, and that's the problem. A lot of people in non-sex segregated schools face the issue of not wanting to do certain STEM subjects because they're scared to be the only girl in the class. And that there have been studies that have shown that male teachers do have a prejudice to teach boys instead of girls. And sex segregation solves that problem, which is why we have seen more women take up STEM subjects in sex-segregated schools. That is why we have seen increased academic results for women in these schools. And the third thing I'm going to mention is, I have not heard this speech yet, but I've heard what's going to be about, which is essentially the notion of racial segregation. And the thing is, schools have not been segregated based on race since about the 60s. And I would argue that essentially, again, it's a symptom of a mass problem. Because at the end of the day, you're not going to fix systemic racism based on where they grew up by just going, right, okay, let's just have a school like that. It's the same notion that it will somehow solve the divide between the two religions here in Ireland. At the end of the day, if you put a non-segregated school in the Falls, for example, that doesn't automatically mean the Protestants will go to that school, because the area mostly has Catholics in it. So those areas, those separations will still be there, even if you have even if you ban segregated schools. So essentially, that is my speech, and please vote for the opposition tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kira, for your speech in tonight's debate. So now we turn to the final speaker for the proposition to conclude the argument for the proposition in tonight's debate, which is Cleona O'Donovan. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. The opposition might argue to try and fix what's not broken, or that it's pointless to try and seek social equality regarding race or socioeconomic background in the school system. However, we all know segregation to be the antithesis of equality. Shane and Jasmine made the points of inequality caused by segregation in terms of private and public schools and gender. I'll be focusing my argument today on the inequalities perpetuated by historical racial segregation in the US school system and its prevalent effects today, as well as the negative effects of religious segregation in Northern Ireland in the past. I hope to impress upon you the importance of recognizing segregation as just that, creating divides. It was Mahatma Gandhi who said, "Our ability to reach unity in diversity will be the beauty and the host and the test of our civilization." The phrase used in favor of segregation in 1950s America, separate but equal, pales in comparison to this more noble and substantive ideal. We might all think that segregation is a thing of the past, but I think it's important to trace back to where many of the issues in the American education system root from today. Whereas the Jim Crow laws might have argued so, we all know today, as a result of this history, that in practice, separate is never equal. Separation of races in education, like many things, meant not only the institutionalized racism at the hands of the state, but also the perpetualization of cycles of race-specific poverty. Whereas the opposition might argue that separation and focusing the education system to an individual's groups and needs might be favorable. This further set back the rights of people of color in the US, as 6 in 10 people of color worked on farms as laborers in the 1950s, and 3 in 10 as domestic services. This is what was usually taught in their segregated schools. This created a cycle of poverty.
On that point?
No, thank you. And limited the rights and opportunities of the Black community in America, only 2% of whom were able to get professional jobs as a result. Despite progressively higher enrollment and higher scores of achievement tests on Black students still lag behind America due to prejudice for white schools, who were allotted more funding and training for their teachers. Whereas we might now say that this was an extreme case and that segregation can be equal when instilled, it is evident from Jim Crow era America that allowing differences in education based on ethnicity or any other factor seeks to perpetuate a system at the cost of minorities' opportunities. The effects of segregated education still echo on in American debate. The differences in funding are a bone of contention that is yet to be adequately addressed by our opposition. In 1930s Alabama, Alabama spent, in 1930s, Alabama spent $37 on every white student for every 7 spent on a black student. In South Carolina, this was nearly 10 to 1 at $53 for every 5. Whereas a ban on segregation in
On that
1950,
point,
no thank you, might make the opposition question how one could address today the inequalities in terms of school funding. The New York Times reported that the school districts serving predominantly people of color are receiving $23 billion less funding than predominantly white schools, despite the insane numbers of students. Whereas schools aren't segregated in theory, in practice, areas of socioeconomic hardship are particularly disadvantaged with regards to education in America, and people of color are disproportionately affected by this. In America, 39% of black children are living below the poverty line, compared to the 12% of white children. Only 8% of those in well-funded, high-performing schools are black, compared to 20% in poorly funded schools. There is a clear correlation between the separation of students by ethnicity and social economic background, and the corrupt way in which the government can hence choose to discriminate when it comes to funding. And despite the futile arguments that segregation doesn't have to mean unequal, Arizona would disagree, who claim the largest funding gap at $7,020 per pupil. The states of California, Texas, and Florida accumulate a funding gap of over $10 billion between their most and least advantaged schools. It cannot be argued that the discrimination of who goes to which schools in the face of privilege leads to just that, discrimination. Whereas the problems prevalent in North America, you might think, are a far stretch from here, they are, I believe, mirrored to an albeit less, but equally important, extent here in Northern Ireland, where religious segregation had a similar, albeit unintentional effect on school funding. When in hopes of more secularism in school, the government offered state funding for voluntary schools in return for 2 public representatives on school committees, and for schools to take religious education off the curriculum. This was not accepted by Catholic schools. Protestant schools accepted these terms for better funding. However, religious education was not taken off the curriculum, resulting in a clear double standard and inequality between standards of funding between schools. No matter the government's valid attempts to create the best and fairest possible learning environment, even by hoping to introduce a certain amount of secularism, these attempts are futile in the face of segregation. To conclude, segregation by definition will be divided, differed, and ultimately unequal, an antithesis to the unity that Gandhi might have been referring to, if you will. So we propose that for the sake of pragmatic education, we should all strive to both embrace and ascertain that our youth is immersed in all cultures, ethnicities, denominations, and what is fundamentally a real education. It is for these reasons that we urge you to vote in favour of the motion. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, Leona, for your speech.
Thank you.
Congratulations once again. So now we turn to the final speaker for the opposition to conclude the opposition's argument in tonight's debate, which is, of course, Keir Crozier. Thank you, Keir.
Hello. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight you've heard the proposition trumpet their belief in the importance of education. We share this belief. However, we have and will continue to show that segregated schools can and do provide excellent education. Furthermore, in reference to Shane's argument, I believe that private schools provide an invaluable resource. Not only does it remove the financial burden of educating wealthy children, whose parents can well afford to pay for it, from the hard-pressed taxpayer who would have to cough up an extra £6 billion per year if private schools were abolished, but it also frees up more spaces in our best non-fee-paying schools for those who need them most. Jamie touched on this briefly, but I'll highlight it again. If you remove the private schools, people attend schools based on their catchment areas. Rich parents can afford to relocate to the best catchment areas, pricing working class families out and actually further entrenching social inequality. It is rare for me to draw on personal experience in my speeches, as I am unashamedly on the side of hard data rather than lived experience, which I generally regard as being little more than a polite way of saying anecdotal evidence. But tonight I hope you will briefly indulge me, because I went to an integrated school, and I can confirm that sectarianism there was rife. The evidence which I saw before me was that attitudes learned from an early age, at home, and in the community remain regardless of integrated education. It is not the magic bullet which the proposition are presenting it as tonight. A point which I feel must be made tonight is that many segregated schools undeniably produce excellent results. Northern Ireland consistently produces the best GCSE and A-level results in the UK, and this is in no small part down to our Catholic grammar schools, in particular our Catholic girls' grammars, which consistently produce brilliant results, with Loreto Grammar and Omagh sharing the top spot in Northern Ireland in the 2019 GCSE League table. By contrast, 3 of the bottom 5 schools were integrated, with my own alma mater taking the dubious honour of being the second worst school in the country, with just 17% of pupils achieving 5 GCSEs or more at grade A stars to C. In the 2018 A-level league table for Northern Ireland, 9 of the top 10 schools were Catholic faith schools, and the principal of the top performing school, St Louis Grammar in Ballymena, was quoted as saying, "There's a certain essence to faith-based education. There's a sense of collegiate responsibility there that maybe doesn't exist in more secular models. It's proven, tried and tested across the world, that faith-based models are the most successful, and I think there's something there that people have to take on board." Those are his words, not mine. And it's not just in grammar schools where the faith-based model excels. As the top-ranking non-grammar school in Northern Ireland with Catholic St Bridget's College in Derry, Londonderry, which ranked 3rd overall and yet has an attendance where 69% of pupils are entitled to free school meals. We hear so much these days about levelling up, but this is real levelling up in action, giving these children from disadvantaged backgrounds the opportunity to succeed in the world. But the proposition wants to deny them that opportunity, to sacrifice them on the altar of ideology. Will we in the opposition say no? Robert Walpole, John Stuart, Earl of Bute, George Grenville, William Pitt the Elder, Frederick North, William Grenville, George Canning, Arthur Wellesley, Duke of Wellington, Earl Grey, William Lamb, Viscount Melbourne, Edward Stanley Smith, Earl of Derby, William Ewart Gladstone, Robert Gascoigne Cecil, Earl of Salisbury, Archibald Primrose, Earl of Rosebery, Arthur Balfour, Anthony Eden, Harold Macmillan, Alec Douglas Hume, David Cameron, and Boris Johnson. All of these men have something in common, namely that, I'm sure as James Orchard knows, they were all British Prime Minister. But they have another thing in common. They all went to Eton, a segregated school which has proven itself over the centuries to be a veritable factory when it comes to the production of the great and the good. So much so that these days parents are willing to fork out the eye-watering fees of £42,000 a year in order to send their children to this superb segregated school, whether it's rich boys in Berkshire or working class girls in Derry, Londonderry. The evidence is clear. Segregated schools deliver the goods. Who are we to deny parents the right to choose what is in their child's best interests? If it is important to a parent that their child attends a school which imparts Catholic or Anglican or Muslim or Jewish values, who are we to say that they cannot do so? Who are we to deny those children the opportunity which we have demonstrated attendance at a segregated school gives them? We are on the side of tolerance in this debate in the face of the proposition's militancy. We aren't demanding that all schools become segregated, merely that the choice should be there. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight the proposition is on the side of compulsion. We're on the side of the freedom to choose. The proposition is on the side of ideology. We're on the side of the children, rich and poor, boys and girls, giving them the best chance to succeed in life. If you're on that side too, then you must vote with the opposition. Thank you.
Thank you, Keir, for that speech. Lots of interesting facts in that one. So now I believe it turns to the audience, so the House, whether the House wishes to raise any questions that you may have from tonight's debate. So is there any questions directed to the proposition? James Orchard.
In 2000, I recall reading that a Ripon Grammar School in England held the only ever ballot of parents to see if the school would shift from being a selective grammar school towards a modern secondary comprehensive school system. In a landslide, local parents voted against changing this after a record £437,000 were spent on the petitions and balloting system. What I'd like to ask the opposition really is this just a fix to an issue that only people who it doesn't affect want to solve?
Proposition to respond.
Yeah, I can, that's fine. I think it's perfectly legitimate for parents to have concerns about their children's education. They're well within their rights to say, this is how I want my child educated. That's perfectly legitimate. However, it's kind of that idea of don't trust the experts. If people have conducted studies in this, they know what they're talking about at the end of the day. And I think in terms of faith schools, it's for children to have a secular education until they decide that kind of religion is a path that they want to follow. Because in my view, there's no such thing as Christian children. No one's born Muslim, no one's born Jewish. It's something that you learn. And I think as much as children can experience, as much as young people can experience, is always going to be for the best at the end of the day. So ultimately, up to kind of an age where the child can consent, it is the parent's choice. But I think to completely ignore the value of experts, the children's needs themselves, principals, the schools, the government, is completely unfair, in my view.
Thank you, Jasmine. So now, any questions to the opposition to respond to this point? Opposition to respond.
All right, yeah, sure. I think you're making the point about what experts say, but I don't think any expert could disagree when they look at the results that faith schools do provide an extremely good education in terms of getting pupils the best grades possible. And therefore, I think that any argument that somehow we're disadvantaging children by sending them there it just holds no water.
Thank you, Keir. Any questions to the opposition? So questions directed to the opposition in tonight's debates. Yes, Mark Gilmore.
Hi there. Kira, I believe you brought up the point that, well, you didn't pay for your education, obviously. You did sit an entrance exam, the 11 plus. I also sat this exam, as did, well, many for these segregated schools. And I was just wondering, does the opposition think that perhaps it's a bit too young of an age to put an 11-year-old, 10-year-old through this really stressful exam which will determine the rest of their life? Is that not something that we should seek to change?
Yes, opposition to respond.
Can I respond to this?
Or
yeah, go for it.
Go for it.
Right. I just sort of want to speak from personal experience in saying that I did not go to a primary school that was considered to be a feeder school for my local grammar. So each year, maybe only one or two pupils would have actually got into the grammar school. So I took the AQA, which is obviously after the 11 plus, and it wasn't for me actually getting in to this grammar school. I don't think I would have been able to have the education that I have very fortunately been afforded to me. And I think that is just one example of you need to have academic selection in order to essentially differentiate between pupils that are more capable and less capable in order to provide the necessary resources to deliver the education, essentially.
Thank you. Proposition to respond to that point?
Yep, I don't mind responding to this. So a while ago, over 2,000 parents took the grammar school 11 plus test, and only 54% were able to correct all of the answers. And these are adults we're talking about, you know, professionals, doctors, lawyers, whatever. And if they can't answer these questions correctly, how can you expect your average 11-year-old to answer them correctly? It's placing far too much strain and far too much stress on an 11-year-old. You know, this will decide their education for the next 5, 6, 7 years. It's far too much stress to place on such a young child.
Thank you, Shane. Any abstaining questions? So these are questions that could be directed at the proposition or the opposition, non-directly in particular. Any abstaining questions? No. Any questions for the proposition?
Me.
What? Oh, you have one for the abstaining question.
No, the proposition.
Oh, any questions to the proposition? Sarah McAllister.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah, so there's been quite a few studies on post-conflict societies that have shown that forcing children into mixed schools actually creates more sectarianism and conflict, because segregated schools allow children to live in their culture and to develop their culture without creating an atmosphere of hostility. So how would banning segregation in any way help with situations like that?
Proposition to respond. Anyone? Proposition?
I think I'm okay to respond to that. I think definitely what we're kind of aiming for is more tolerance. I mean, I don't think that anyone is going to learn to be more tolerant and to be more accepting as an adult if they're not really experiencing it from a young age. It's like anything, you know, I mean, more exposure is always best. I mean, real education should be learning from other people who aren't necessarily the exact same as you or come from the same backgrounds. It should definitely be more hands-on like that, I think.
Opposition to respond?
Can I, if that's okay, lads? Anyway, but essentially, it's kind of this assumption that if you go through segregated education, you're automatically going to be prejudiced against the other side, and that's just not the case. Like, the majority of people who leave segregated education are not made prejudiced from the education they're in. We're not taught to hate the other side in segregated education. What it actually comes from is the society where they grow up in. So if you have parents that go, oh, don't talk to them, they're Catholic, or don't talk to them, they're Protestant, or you have, you know, certain areas that openly do things that they're hateful towards the other side, like that instigates prejudice, not the school system.
Any questions to the opposition? Any questions directed to the opposition in tonight's debate? Do you have one? No. Any abstaining questions at all? Any questions to the proposition? You have one, Mr. Owie?
Yes, I have finally. So mine's basically directed at Shane because it was around private schools. So he went on in his speech about how private schools entrench privilege, but they did a study a few years ago of slums, and most of the people who in the third world, and most of the people who get, or children who get their education in slums in the third world, do it through low-cost private schools. So private schools that are charging hardly any money, because of obviously they're serving quite a poor population. But your speech seems to be focused on the very pinnacle of the top, most expensive private schools. So can you address the variety of private schools that exist around the world?
Yes. Proposition to respond.
Is my mic?
Hello.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes, you're back.
Good. Yeah, sorry for that. So yeah, my speech focused more on UK private schools, Ryan. So looking at the top ones, as Keir mentioned earlier on, we've had so many prime ministers, British prime ministers coming from Eton, coming from that elite, most expensive private school, and so I think that's where we should direct our attention to. when looking at segregation education, because it's the one that causes the most harm to society. It's the one that causes the most division. Because yes, there are some schools in the developing world that you can pay a couple of grand, maybe $5 to go to attend, but that's not the case in the UK. You know, the best private schools, you're paying 30, 35, 40 grand a year to send your child to a private school per year, and that's just one child. If you have several children, how is any family going to afford that? You'd have to be born into money. You'd have to win the lottery of life, and that's our argument.
Thank you, Shane. Opposition to respond.
Can I respond?
Sorry. Yeah, I think.
Okay, go for it.
Okay, yeah.
Time between yourselves.
What I was, the argument I would make would be that if you take those privileged children out of the private schools, they still have to go to school, and those places will have to be funded by the taxpayer. So we actually relieve the burden on the taxpayer by allowing these wealthy families to pay what they can to send them to private schools. Also, it means, I raised this issue as well, the best schools in England, they could go, there's non-private schools, they're in certain catchment areas. So house prices are naturally very high in those catchment areas, so the rich families will just send their children there, driving children out, the poor children out of those schools, which is actually worse for in terms of inequality than the system which we currently have. And I would like to see more grammars. I mean, I talked about Prime Ministers, Theresa May and Margaret Thatcher were both grammar school girls, and I think that is the answer in terms of ensuring that those from less privileged backgrounds do get the opportunities they want, as opposed to trying to level up instead.
Thank you, Keir. Now we have time for one or two more questions. So any questions at all? Any questions, either proposition, opposition, or abstaining? Does anyone have any questions? Final chance to ask a question. Yes, Eva Cahoon.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's great.
Brilliant, thank you. This is an abstaining question. So reports have repeatedly highlighted that there's mass educational underachievement in Protestant working class boys in Northern Ireland. Does the education system need reformed in terms of decreasing segregation or increasing segregation in order to address this major issue?
I'll go to the opposition first to respond.
I'll respond. I think the main kind of issue about the whole Protestant working men thing, again, it's kind of this issue just in terms of the area they're in. So, for example, they come from low socioeconomic backgrounds, which means they don't maybe take education as seriously. So I think the issue is not really to do with education. It's more like the area that they grow up in, which is essentially you need to pump money and give more opportunities to those working class Protestant boys or men or whatever, instead of basically, again, I don't think a non-segregated education system would fix that. It's more a socio-economic problem that you have to pump money into that area to solve.
Thank you for that response. Go to the proposition now to respond to that question.
Yeah, I'm happy to. So I would agree with Ola in saying that it's kind of more, it's a larger problem than that. It's a problem of location and funding. But I would kind of go one step further and say that integration would help, because I think putting boys of the same circumstances in one school wouldn't challenge them. I think having a diverse community of students including higher achievers, would encourage those students to be open to maybe other cultures and other ways of looking at education than they might kind of currently see. That's not to say that everyone from that community doesn't care about education. Of course, that's not true. But I think, as I said before, having a diverse population of students who all have different values, different experiences that they can bring, will only benefit those students more. So that's kind of my response.
Thank you. So that is the questions over. So now it's time to do the vote on speaker abilities. So this is a vote based on the speeches that you've heard in tonight's debate. Purely the speeches. This is not your own views coming into the debate, but this is which speakers you believe have given the best speeches and the most convincing arguments in tonight's debate. So all those who believe that the proposition gave a more convincing argument in tonight's debate, please raise your hand and vote aye.
Four.
Mr. Secretary, 4. Can you? Oh no, but I've got 5 now.
I see 5 now. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Could you lower your hands now, then, please? All those who believe that the opposition gave a more convincing argument in tonight's debate, please raise your hands and say nay.
Teams is not updating. I still see 5, and it's the same people as before.
Okay, I've got 10. 11.
Sure. I'll believe you've got 11.
I've got 11 there. All right, could you lower your hands now, please? And all those who wish to abstain on the motion, please raise your hands now. I've got 4.
Cool.
Okay, Mr. Secretary, can we get the vote on speaker ability, please?
With 5 votes for the proposition, 11 votes for the opposition, and 4 abstentions, it looks like this House would not ban segregation in education.
Okay, brilliant. So thank you everyone for coming to tonight's debate. I believe Ryan has a events notification that he'd like to make.
Basically, just to say, obviously, Matt said at the beginning about how we've got the lit talk with Julian Smith, the former Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, tomorrow. If any of you have any questions for Julian Smith, just either send me a message on Facebook or send the Literific Facebook page a message, because I need to get some questions for him for tomorrow. So that's all.
Great. So if you have any questions for Julian Smith, please do send those in. Also, if you'd like to speak in next week's debate, which is on the Irish Language Act, that would be good. And if you wish to speak in our Christmas mini debates, please do contact the page or Emily Monroe, our internal convener. And we will be announcing our future talks and future things for next semester very shortly. We have an internal conveners meeting, which Emily has let me know about. So that is on the 16th of December at 6 p.m. So that's where you can put forward your motions that you think the society should discuss in next semester. And also there will be another internal conveners meeting, but a bit different, on the great debates, which I think Ryan will be announcing shortly. So keep an eye out for that. And we do have our spreadsheet up on the Literary Forum to suggest motions. So please do that. All right. So thank you, everyone, for coming. Thanks for all the speakers again tonight. And congratulations to the opposition once again. So good night. Thank you for coming. And bye-bye.